Hey everyone, History Mystery Man here, coming to you today from Jackson, Michigan. Sweating like a hog here in Jackson, Michigan, because I've been crawling through the forest, through the weeds for quite some time in search of the old Jackson Motor Speedway, which was at one time a high bank, half-mile oiled dirt track. Born in 1948, the place lived up until 1973 and had a fascinating history along the way. And I'm starting to see some cement, so I think I've found the old entrance to Jackson Motor Speedway. Stand by. This is going to be good. I've just now been learning about Jackson Motor Speedway, and for the few people I've talked to, it was a very special place for a lot of people.
Well, the premier racetrack here in the middle.
What was so magical about the place?
Well, the history behind it. I mean, it was built in 1948. It started out a half-mile dirt track, and it was a high bank oiled dirt track, wide banked. It was very, very mean. My dad drove there from 1948 right up to about 1967.
Now I saw, looking at an old winner's list, I saw a winner listed in 1952. His name was, I think, Phil Collins.
Yeah, that's my dad.
That's your dad?
Yeah.
Wow. So your dad was a winner at the Jackson Motor Speedway?
Yeah, he won the championship in '52.
Wow.
And then, you know, dabbled and drove there right up to the 60s, and then he ended up buying the track with 3 other gentlemen and promoted it for about 4 years. And I pretty much grew up there. That was my playground growing up. Yeah, I mean, the track was a mechanic setup guy's nightmare because of the way it was configured. You know, high bank 1 and 2 and semi bank 3 and 4, and it's got a short dog leg out of 4.
That's really unusual.
Yeah, and it was a very fast track. You know, they ran, you know, USAC midgets here, sprint cars, stock cars, modifieds. So a lot of drivers got their start here that ended up going to the big leagues. You know, Benny Parsons, he started his career here. So this is the entrance right here. That would have been the parking lot. Okay.
This is it right there, isn't it?
Gate,
that gate.
This gate is actually.
That's the pit gate.
That's the pit gate. That's where they do drive up, right in there, and go all the way up, hanging right into turn 1 and go down into the pits. The parking lot was a huge oil parking lot. There's a big oil tank sitting there. If you look at the tree line here, you see where behind those trees right there, it's kind of just open.
Yeah, I see that. That's the banking, isn't it? That's 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's the bank. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, turn around.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go up that little dirt turnaround.
And you're going to dump me off and wish me well? Yeah.
Kind of a covert operation here. When my dad owned it, we were here most all week when school was out. We were here all weekend. My sister and brother worked here. My mom worked in the ticket office. I can remember being in the ticket office on a USAC show, with the police standing outside the door, and my mom and the other owner's wives counting money, and I can remember just my mom's hands would be black from counting money, and it'd be piles of it.
Wow.
And, you know, I was pretty young.
But you remember that.
But I remember everything from out here like it was vividly in 3D color, man.
Yeah, and I know you have, like you said, you came out here a couple of years ago, and you just sit and reflect.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I mean, that's neat.
I always come out and sit on turns 1 and 2 in the middle of the high banking, and I can almost smell and hear the sounds of back then. Here, my dad taught me how to drive and I actually drove his stock car. That's how I learned how to drive. When I was probably 8 years old, he took me around the track, you know, full speed, did spin outs in 1 and 2, and my first reply to him was, "Damn, Dad, can we do that again?"
I am getting eaten alive. This is only some of the forestry I had to navigate my way through on the way here. There's a lot of that going that way and a whole lot of that heading that way, but this was my best path in to the old Jackson Motor Speedway. It has not been easy. Finally, I have come upon some old asphalt, and this, I think, was the pit entrance, or that led into the old speedway anyway. And here it is. Oh my Lord. I have found the old Jackson Motor Speedway. Wow. This is fascinating. Heading off into turn one right now. At one time, this was 20 to 25 degrees of banking. And the stories this place could tell. You talk about lost speedways. This is a lost and found speedway. This is, as I mentioned, born as an oil dirt track, half-mile high bank track in 1948. Its first winner here, October 3rd, 1948, gentleman by the name of Carl Scarborough, a name you may recognize. Carl was the only driver to ever die of heat exhaustion during the Indianapolis 500. 1953, that year, it was so bloody hot that each and every driver had to get relief, all except the race winner, Bill Vukovich, that is, the Mad Russian, the Iron Man. But anyway, Scarborough crawled out for relief. Someone else climbed in, and his temperature shot up to 104. It never came down, and he passed on later that day during the 53 Indy 500. But this is it. This is where he won the first ever race at Jackson Motor Speedway. This place has and holds just a fascinating history. The list of winners here is a who's who in motorsports for sure. We talked about Carl Scarborough. Ralph Donaldson is a former winner here. So was the late Don Branson, won a couple of races here at Jackson. How about R.G. Atwood, listed as a winner in 1953? It was R.G. Atwood who purchased the speedway in 1958 and eventually paved it. Raleigh and Al Beal, two of my heroes, former winners here at Jackson Motor Speedway. Dick Good won a ton of features here at Jackson. How about Joy Fair? Talk about an iconic super late model veteran, stock car open wheel veteran, Joy Fair. Sam Sessions is a former winner here. Butch and Gary Fedowa. How about ASA champions Harold Fair and Bob Seneker, all winners here at Jackson. Joe Ruttman won a feature here. How about 7-time national USAC midget champion Mel Kenyon, a 2-time winner here in the USAC midget ranks here at Jackson Motor Speedway. Dick Simmons won a bunch here, as most of you know. Nolan Johncock, and probably its most famous winner, 2-time Indianapolis 500 champion Gordon Johncock, won big here and a championship here. Set the track record here in 1963 in an open wheel homemade contraption, whatever you want to call it. They were all homemade back then. So much character in these cars, and so much character in the men who drove them. But anyway, Gordon Johncock set the one-lap track record here, 1468 in 1963, and unless I break it today, that record still stands. Still on the backstretch, getting ready to set up for turns 3 and 4, but it was right about here that in 1969, a driver by the name of John Deering in a USAC midget race tumbled off the backstretch here and did not survive. One of 7 fatalities over the years here at Jackson, and more on that later. Heading down through turn 3, wrapping around toward turn 4, you can tell it's much flatter down here. Only 6 to 8 degrees of banking compared to the near 25 at the other end, and in turns 1 and 2. And this, of course, was a nightmare for those who had to set up the chassis, not only to negotiate a high banked 1 and 2, but then to come down into a flat 3 and 4. It was really, really super challenging, and which, you know, I admire the drivers even more here for being able to conquer this place and get the job done. Wow, look at this. This is interesting. I'm gonna go way up the bank and come around toward turn 4, just to give you some of the landscape back here. It's hard to imagine that Jackson Motor Speedway was once alive and well here, and seeing what we see now. It's so interesting. Coming down off turn 4 onto what would have been the main straightaway, and somewhere up there were the old grandstands. You can see one of the old light poles still stands, and I don't really want to crawl back up in there, but I might just take what the heck, I crawled through the weeds this far. Look at that. That's the wall. Check that out. The front stretch wall, old railroad ties backed up by cement. Wow. I think these mosquitoes are gonna soon carry me away. Hello? Dick? How are you, sir? I like that ride. You gonna fix that up and spit shine it?
No,
No?
give it away.
You're gonna give it away?
Yep.
What is it?
25T.
25 Model T. Wow. What do you mean you're gonna give it away?
I give it to the Lenawee County Humane Society,
Really?
and they're selling raffle tickets on it,
Oh, no kidding. Just as it is?
as it is.
I gotcha. Okay.
Well, I run there prior to that in a modified.
Okay.
Well, okay, that would have been 67 or 68,
Okay.
and I was driving for three guys from Chelsea owned a car.
You know, I know the one end, 1 and 2 was banked pretty high. The other end was relatively flat. All that said, how challenging was that track in comparison to other tracks you ran?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, because it was difficult to set up for both ends. And but when we were on the modified there, it was low slung, and you come out of that second turn, headed down the backstretch. I couldn't see down the backstretch. I had to grip my teeth and nail it. I had to duck down to see.
What do you mean you couldn't see?
The roof was so low on the modified, and you're going downhill there. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But to run that track, you had to go in number one. You had to get that right rear right up on the edge, and you knew you wasn't going to make it. Kind of puckered things up, but you did it anyway if you wanted to get around there. So.
Yeah.
The first time I ever went there, I think was with my dad to a motorcycle race, and I'm pretty sure that would have been on dirt.
Wow.
And I remember somebody lost it in number one, the bike ended up in number two, and another guy hit it and went ass over tea kettle out in the trees.
He wasn't the only one at Jackson that went off into the trees. Have you been back to Jackson Motor Speedway since it closed, just to wander around the old property? I mean, I found myself doing it the other day.
I haven't.
You haven't?
I often thought about it. I talked to, Dick Slade, which he just died here a couple months ago. He was back there not too long ago, I guess.
Would something like that interest you, going back to the old Speedway and wandering around?
I don't know.
No?
I don't know. I talked to somebody that went to Manchester and wandered around there, and I don't know. But,
Who stands out to you, though, who has really had that place figured out?
well, you got to back up a little bit when they was running super modifieds, and I never run against him, but it was Dick Good from Mishawaka, Indiana, and he dominated that.
I've heard a lot about that guy, and I looked at an old winners list and saw his name on it a lot.
He was on there a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Fita was, and
Yep.
Senecers, and Joy Fair. I don't remember if Joy Fair run there or not.
He did. We got a picture of him going around the track in a yellow number one. Yep. Did you know him?
Joy Fair?
Yeah.
Well, him and I, for whatever reason, really,
Didn't click.
we didn't have dinner together.
Oh, why? Where did that come from?
I don't know. Just one of them deals.
Yeah, I get it. I get
I
it.
guess I rubbed him wrong and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, that happens in this business. By the way, your property here is beautiful. I really love it. Did you live here when you were going all the way back to that era, late 60s, early 70s? Okay, I thought maybe this might have been your shop as well. But no.
My shop at that time was not this big.
Yeah.
It probably was this crowded, but it wasn't this big.
Sure. Are you from Hudson?
Yeah.
Are you really? Okay. So you grew up here and you're still here.
Well, I lived right in town, on the south side of town.
Yeah.
Where we lived before.
Yeah. How old are you now?
81.
81. You look good. You really do. You feeling all right?
Well, it depends on the time of day.
Okay. You had a lot of firsts at Jackson Motor Speedway.
I learned how to drive out there. My dad taught me how to drive. I rode in my first race car out there. I learned how to drive a stick shift in a stock car. I got my first kiss of a girl out there. Drank my first beer out there. Smoked my first cigarette. I think I got my first fist bite under the grandstands out there. Just many firsts.
Hey there, still sweating like a hog. In the meantime, I thought I'd give you a quick synopsis of how this track came to be. It was built in 1948 by a gentleman by the name of Ralph Stahl and his wife Zelma. They had 7 kids, all of whom worked at the Speedway, but 2 of those kids, Ralph Jr. and Bob, came home from the war, and they went to work right away on this grand old Speedway, born as a half-mile high-banked oiled dirt track. I thought it was interesting. One of the daughters, Sandy, said that the girls wanted a roller rink, but the boys wanted a racetrack. And of course, I guess in 1948, the boys got their way. I don't know if they would today. You know, if we were doing this today, we might be talking about a roller rink, but we're not. We're talking about the old Jackson Speedway. It had an interesting history and a difficult one at times as well. We know that 7 people lost their lives here. But in 1953, we know to help make things safer, they built a flat little quarter mile here inside the big half mile. And it probably didn't go over all that well. You can only imagine a high banked dirt super speedway going to a little flat quarter mile. Not there soon after that, in 1954, they decided to reach a happy medium and construct a 3/8 mile banked dirt track. They kept the old banking in 1 and 2 from the old half mile and used the flat quarter mile banking in turns 3 and 4. And it stayed that way up until 1958 when a gentleman by the name of R.G. Atwood purchased the Speedway. And the first thing he did was pave it, which probably went over like a lead balloon, but nonetheless, the track did manage to thrive on through those years. Maybe not so well as it did as a high bank dirt track, but the 3/8 paved version that came along in 58 did support some great racing over the years for sure. Now the track did very well through the 1960s and then came under a new ownership group in 1967. The new group was a combination of former racer Ed Todd, Ralph Stoll Jr., son of the original owners, Art Everett, who came in as track president, and former track champion Phil Collins, the vice president. The new team made several capital improvements, including repaving the racetrack, and they built brand new restroom facilities, new grandstands, new lights, and a new PA system. The place was really headed in the right direction. Then Spartan Speedway out of Lansing, Michigan stepped in and made an offer they just couldn't refuse. And the property was sold again in 1970. It also signaled the end. With a brand new Michigan International Speedway, Super Speedway Palace just down the road, the new owners began to feel the heat and they tried to give the old Jackson Motor Speedway more of a corporate commercial feel. And it just didn't work. After all, the track had always been founded on the fun family approach, the mom and pop feel the Stolls had put in play so many decades ago, and the track just began to fizzle out. The race teams began to disappear, the race fans went away, and the track was closed by August 1973. Now, Phil Collins, part of that third ownership group, actually did try to revive the old place, but new zoning laws restricted progress, and the grandfather clauses that were once in play were gone. The neighborhoods were coming, and the effort just hit the skids. By the late 70s, Phil's health began to fade, and he actually underwent a heart transplant in 1978 to help save his life. One of the first transplants ever in the United States. He died in 1984, and with it, the last hope and dream to ever keep the old Jackson Motor Speedway alive and well. I thought it was only fitting that we would honor some of the brave souls who lost their lives at Jackson Motor Speedway one of whom would be James Ryan, the photographer who was struck and killed by a race car on July 29, 1951. He's buried here in Jackson at the St. John's Catholic Cemetery. I thought it was interesting. Before James Ryan died, he made a wish known to his wife that upon his death, he wanted one more lap around the old Jackson Motor Speedway, the place he cherished. And as part of the funeral procession, James Ryan, in the hearse, got one more trip around the old Jackson Motor Speedway. Now, we know Jackson Motor Speedway had a super exciting history, but in fact, a tragic one as well. 7 men lost their lives here over the years, the first of whom was a gentleman by the name of James Ryan. On July 29th, 1951, keep that date in your mind. I dug a little further and come to learn that he was in fact not a driver. He was a photographer who was standing down in turn 1 unaware with his camera pointed in the opposite direction that an out-of-control car was barreling his way. It took his life. That date fascinates me. I don't want to get off subject too far, but I did want to touch base with this story. Many of you race fans and historians may know about July 29th, 1951 across America. It was listed or called Black Sunday, and that's because 6 humans lost their lives at racetracks that day, Black Sunday. And I always knew that there was a photographer that lost his life on that day as part of that group, but I never knew who it was or where it was. Well, mystery solved. We know it was right here at Jackson Motor Speedway, James Ryan, photographer. But
Part of the story with what happened there is there was a booth up on top of turn 1 that was his photography booth. He had made a decree, Mr. Ryan, that in the event that anything should ever happen to him at the track, that he wanted my dad to lead his hearse around the track if he was killed. And this was long before, this even happened. So, inevitably it did happen. And
so Black Sunday, 1951, July 29th, Winchester Speedway. We know that Cecil Green, subbing for Troy Ruttman in the number 98 JC Agajanian Offenhauser, spun out in qualifying. Turns 1 and 2 backed up the banking, crashed over the rail, and died en route to the hospital. Well, as soon as the ambulance got back, the very next guy to go out, guy by the name of Bill Mackey, went out and spun in the exact same spot in turns 1 and 2, backed right up into the same exact tire skids, went over the banking and lost his life. That was at Winchester Speedway alone. When the ambulance got back, all these drivers now had all this time to contemplate what had just happened. Dwayne Carter goes out and sets a brand new 1-lap track record. No roll cage, no power steering, a leather Cromwell helmet, skinny hard tires. An amazing story. We also know that Walt Brown lost his life in a Western USAC big car race at Williams Grove Speedway that same day, July 29th, 1951. There were also a couple of spectators killed at the Mount Holly Speedway in Peoria, Illinois. But the history of that Black Sunday, that day, that terrible day, includes Jackson Motor Speedway. And I talk about these guys in honor of these guys, out of respect for these guys and their families who lost their loved ones here on the Jackson High Banks, including Clarence Mifflin, who on September 3rd, 1951, lost his life. Jim Stremi, 24-year-old Jim Stremi, May 4th, 1959, was killed here. And I've got to believe he was from South Bend. Well, David Stremi, NASCAR Cup Series veteran and dirt modified genius, is also from South Bend. So I've got to believe they're related, interestingly enough. William Skowronski, 38-year-old driver, lost his life here October 4th, 1953. Wayne Pruden died here. He was 31, June 13th, 1968. And of course, John Deering in the USAC midget race here in 1969. But I mean, this place still rings with their memory. And I think about those guys, those early pioneers, those early gladiators who pioneered this sport to make it as safe as it is today, but it certainly wasn't back then, and many, many drivers lost their life doing it. So long, Jackson Motor Speedway. Thanks for the ride. Back up into the forest we go. I can see why this place is near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it's just so many memories. That's all I knew growing up. You know, sitting around the dinner table, you know, my dad talked about all the other drivers he raced with, Ralph Donaldson and everybody. And we'd go out there on a Sunday and clean up stands, and they'd have Trips come in. Bill Tripp and his family lived right next to the track. They'd come in and clean, and man, I'd find watches, diamond rings. I mean, you know, a young kid finding a $5 bill, that's a lot of candy. And you know, it was just a lot of memories, and something you never forget.